welcome to Dipping Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm very fortunate this morning to be sitting down with Lee Cooper. I've met Lee in person, and to say that he's a lovely individual would be an understatement. Lee is a freelance photographer. He set up Victorious Voices, and we're actually quite local, aren't we, Lee?
We are, yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I love hearing another northern accent. It makes me feel good. But yes, I will hand over to you to explain a bit more about what you do, Lee.
So yeah, thank you. I am a freelance photographer, as you said, and my main project at the minute is Victorious Voices, which is more than a photography project, I'd say. We're building like a platform, a community for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to be heard and be seen, which is surprisingly difficult in society. We are often ignored and hidden, as an exhibition we had at the University of Glasgow proved recently. That was very, very challenging. We're still trying to get an apology for the way we was treated, but it's very difficult to get. Um, but yeah, the premise of Victoria's Voices is it's just a place where we can share our stories without the shame that we feel that we have to carry. Um, when we don't. You know, the shame and all the negativity belongs on perpetrators. But in the society we live in, perpetrators are very much protected by numerous ways, really.
Yeah.
And it goes right from the top, you know, from the legal system to societal norms. It's all geared at protecting abusers, which is has to change and it will change.
Yeah, it has absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, that's one of the things when we had a chat a while ago that really struck me is because obviously I work around post-separation abuse, but to me, any form of abuse, whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's, child sexual abuse, whether it's rape, whatever it is, to me, it's so important that we get rid of that shame because that's the whole point to me. Why are we putting that blame and shame on the person that is the victim or survivor? And we're just letting the perpetrator wander around freely, not thinking that they've done anything wrong, and all that shame and blame. And you're right, society does it. Society, when I talk about post-separation abuse, people, why didn't you just leave? Well, why would you assume somebody could? It's these assumptions that we've got to get
Yeah,
past, making assumptions about things that we know nothing about. And I think that's so important because I think so much of humanity is driven by ego. We all like to think, well, I know best, or well, I don't want to say this, but I know I would never let that happen to me. And I think if people were really honest with themselves and admitted that that's what they think, then at least I think that would be a start in starting to change things because we have to admit that we don't know everything. And I think what you're doing is, well, it's not even incredible. There isn't a word in the dictionary, Lee, to say what you do. And I was reading up on the situation where you were in Glasgow recently, and to say that that was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. It's just proving the point, isn't it? It's sidelining the problem. It's saying, we'll on the face of it, we'll show that we care and that we want to kind of push that story out there and that agenda. But actually, really, it's no, we don't really want to touch that. We don't want to go there, which then reaffirms how you feel about the fact that that shame and blame is all on the individual, and it's just so wrong.
it is. So for people that aren't familiar, I will like go to the start of that.
Yeah,
So I post a lot of my work on LinkedIn, and it come to the attention of a therapist in Glasgow called Karen and a doctor called Dougie, and they was putting an exhibition together of artwork created by adults and children in therapy expressing trauma. And they got given a spot at the University of Glasgow to display this as part of the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival.
yeah,
And they asked me if I wanted to like partner up with them, and I said that'd be amazing. It like
yeah.
synchronicity, it just fit. You know, the theme of the festival was invisible, so they wanted to explore what makes people feel invisible, what barriers are in place that do make people invisible, and what impact does feeling invisible have on people. So I was like, well, we're trying to bring visibility to childhood sexual abuse. This is perfect. Um, so we was all set and it was exciting, and we got the artwork up there, and then I got there on the Friday. I think it was Friday the 10th of October, the 11th, Friday the 11th of October. Um, got up there and they'd placed us in like a really great spot. So it was a prominent position. It was called the Advanced Research Centre
Yeah.
at the University of Glasgow, and was at the main entrance where you walk in. And the portraits was on podiums and it looked really powerful. Um, and we had a great opening night. You know, there was about 40, 50 people there, and it was fantastic. But there's a minor issue where the faculty staff said there was one harrowing piece that they took down on the opening night. Um, and what's interesting is this it was artwork that a child had drawn, um,
Right.
and it's harrowing in what it depicts, but it wasn't particularly harrowing, if that makes sense. So what
Yeah.
it was basically
No, excuse me.
it basically described ritual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. So it had like
Yeah.
masks and candles and
Yeah.
described what happened. So it's heavy, it's quite dark, but
Yeah.
visually it wasn't harrowing. It was just what it represents.
Sorry, I'm having a cough.
Um,
I'll I'll edit this out, don't worry.
so
So
that
sorry. Told you I wasn't well. Sorry, carry on.
it depicts ritual abuse, which for me is interesting because there are people in society that engage in this, and they're often in positions of power. So that's interesting for me that this particular piece has been singled out as harrowing and has to be taken down. So they did take that down. We put it back, and then on the Monday, so it closed for the weekend, and on the Monday, a friend of mine went to the exhibition. She's a survivor, CSA survivor, and she was like, "Oh, this is fantastic, like amazing." But in the video that she sent me, it wasn't in the spot where we left it at the entrance. It had been moved. So I messaged Karen and Dougie, and they said, yeah, the university emailed them this morning to say they'd moved it because several members of staff found it uncomfortable and disturbing. So that really pissed me off.
Yeah, well, and quite rightly so, because what are we doing? Just showing what's acceptable.
Well,
So,
what was annoying was the university chose to put it there. They picked the original spot. So all these considerations, they should have thought about this. People will react. It's the whole point of it.
yeah,
It's not all going to be positive reactions. People are going to be triggered by it because they relate to it. They're not ready to touch it. Um, but the fact that like our experiences are troubling, like that's just too bad. Like
of course it is. Too right.
you're going to have to deal with that, unfortunately. And
Yeah,
what was particularly annoying is we presented this, all things are considered, so this was presented as this is what trauma looks like and this is how we deal with it. And if that's too much to handle, then what does that say?
well, precisely. If we're not willing to, it's like saying we're willing to accept certain pieces of the jigsaw, but not all of it because
It's
it's too
exactly
much.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
That basically what the university did was what society does. So they put it in a side studio, which was pretty much hidden. Unless you was like really looking for it, you wouldn't know it's there. So what society does with all forms of abuse really is they'll acknowledge it's a thing. Like, yes, CSA exists, but we're going to put it here. We're going to ignore that and just pretend everything's fine. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to investigate it. We're not going to really look into it, but we will acknowledge it.
Yeah, we're not going to draw people's attention to it. We're just, yeah, exactly. And you know what? In an ironic way, they have highlighted exactly what's wrong with society. So that university have highlighted. And the worst part of it is, and we know around statistics, when people ask me about statistics, I always say they're never a true reflection. So I don't tend to focus on statistics because if I'm talking about post-separation abuse, a lot of people don't actually know they're experiencing it. Just as I would imagine with CSA, a lot of people don't know, and a lot of children don't realise that that's what's going on. So when you're looking at universities and you're looking at teenagers and you're looking at young adults who are there and the staff themselves that, have been children at one point or other in their lives, any of those people could have been victims or survivors. And, we're almost saying it's a bit like when children need support through school, whether it's around domestic abuse or whatever. It's like saying, well, it doesn't touch our school, so we don't need you to come in. It
Yeah.
doesn't touch my organisation. When I've tried to reach out to organisations, say, can I come and talk to you about post-separation abuse, and you don't get a response, you know what they're thinking is, we don't have that problem here, or we do, but we don't want to acknowledge it. And
Yeah,
that is the problem. They are the problem,
it
and
is a
it's
problem. It's a big problem. And one of the things I said in the letter, so I wrote a demand letter that they put the exhibition back and they
right.
apologized for moving it. So what the university did is they ran the clock down because they knew the exhibition was 2 weeks. So they didn't respond to our letter until after it had finished and then refused to apologize. Um, and we're still trying to get an apology. But it got quite a bit of attention. So it was in the Herald, which is a
I
broadsheet
saw that. Yeah, I
in
saw that this
Scotland.
morning.
Uh, the SNP, Paul Sweeney for Glasgow, got involved. He wrote a letter to the university,
Yeah.
but he's been quite disappointed actually. I've just emailed him this morning in that the university replied with like a weak letter. It just basically said, we did this to protect our staff, and that was it. They refused to apologize. Um, and the SNP has like just gone along with that. Like, this is the reason. I was
So
like, you
what
need,
happens to freedom of speech? What happens to, us as being allowed? So we can only talk about things. And this is what annoys me is it's who sets that standard? Who says that this, where do we draw that
yeah,
line? Where do we draw that distinction as what's acceptable? And the really, oh, I'm getting on my soapbox now, but what really makes me angry about this is we're willing to subject children to music on the, and I'm not being an old fart. I've listened to a lot of music in my life and loved a lot of different types of music. But we allow children to listen to things on the radio or through the TV or whatever form of platform they use to get it. They're listening to all sorts, and that's acceptable. So are the university banning that for their staff or the people that are there? This is what annoys me is we're saying that certain things are acceptable. Yes, that's fine. We can deal with that. But then when we talk about something that's real, that's actually going on in the world, and that is a serious, serious problem. Well, no, we don't want to talk about that. And it makes me so cross. It really does.
what's really interesting is at the same time as this, they had an exhibition for gender-based violence,
Yeah.
which not only did they allow, but they like promoted that.
Highlighted. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's because that's for them, you see. And I'm somebody that talks about anyone can be a victim or survivor of abuse. That's, the way I see it. Um, but it's interesting because you find a lot of establishments, organizations want to jump on bandwagons, and when it suits, and like you say, and then the problem then is it's pitting people against each other. It's pitting victims and survivors against each other, saying, well, this is more important than that. And no one survivor or victim is more important than another. They're all important. They're all victims and survivors, regardless of whether it's, like as you say, gender-based violence, whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's child sexual abuse. It doesn't matter. These are all things that are important to talk about. And we shouldn't be putting that divide between victims and survivors. Everybody needs support.
yeah. But CSA is taboo for many reasons. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. We don't like to think people can do that. But I think for me, I've said this a lot. The real crux of it is for every survivor, there's a perpetrator. We're not abused by magic. So if tomorrow, for example, every single perpetrator of CSA was publicly known and every single survivor of CSA would publicly be known, everything would collapse because perpetrators are not like the creepy guy down the park, the stereotype. They're
Yeah.
Mr. Whoever. Oh, I thought he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
You
Oh
know,
yeah, and to the world. And that's again, that's those links between all forms of abuses. And I did a talk the other day for Cambridgeshire Council, and I was talking about we've got to get rid of this stigma of what we think a victim looks like, of what we think a perpetrator looks like. Because actually, a perpetrator can be a police officer, it can be a judge, it can be your teacher, it can be it can be anybody, it can be your neighbour. At the end
Yeah.
of the day, we can't have this idea anymore in our minds of this build-up of what a perpetrator looks like because it's wrong. It can be anybody, and usually they're the most charismatic. They're the kindest on the surface, to the world. My mum calls it street angel, house devil. And I love that. I just think it sums it up. She used to talk about somebody and somebody we knew and they were very much that a street angel, house devil. And that's what the world wants to believe is, oh, I can't believe that person could do that. But they were in a position of authority. They can't possibly be like that. Well,
Yeah.
actually, they use that position of authority, whatever that role is that they have in life, to cover the abuse up because they know they can. They could say, how could you think it was me? I couldn't do that. I'm X, Y, and Z. So yeah, we've really got to get past this idea that we think we know what a perpetrator looks like, or indeed what we think a victim looks like.
That's the whole premise of Victoria's Voices as well, in that CSA survivors are perceived as broken people, weak, broken people, um, damaged beyond repair, all that, all them stereotypes. When actually we're not. Like everyone in our group is extremely powerful,
Yeah.
and we live in abusive systems, and they don't like that. They don't like powerful people that will stand up for themselves and say
No.
this is wrong, apologize to us, and then won't back down,
Yeah.
down the throats repeatedly.
Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
like it. They want you to just be quiet, shut up, go away.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the time for that has passed now,
Yeah.
particularly for my group anyway.
Do you know what's so true about that as well is I've always said that perpetrators of in the area that I've worked in around post-separation abuse is perpetrators are relentless. They're absolutely relentless. They will not stop till they get what they want, whether it's seeing you put in prison, whether it's seeing you psychologically assessed, your children taken, but whatever it is, perpetrators are relentless. But I think in some ways, from what you've just said, we need to, for victims and survivors, we need to be able to say, actually, we're relentless. We're not going to stop. So you can be as
Exactly.
relentless as you like, absolutely. But you know what? I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm going to be just as relentless as you are. And I think that's when systems, like you say, don't like it, when you're not just putting up and shutting up and doing as you're told. And I think what's happened, unfortunately, for so long is for victims and survivors is they've been they've been scared into believing that that authority figure, that person that's either been their abuser, they're scared of authority. They think what's going to happen? It's that what if? And if we can get past that and say, actually, you know what, I'm going to challenge this system like you've done and say, this is wrong. And this is the problem in this day and age now, I think, unfortunately, and again, I'm getting on the soapbox, is we're so scared of saying, no, that's wrong, because we're so scared of offending and hurting someone's feelings, or like you say, at the university, it's upsetting our staff. So you're telling me that none of those members of staff have ever experienced anything traumatic in their lives? That actually, if you spoke about that exhibition, might be able to help them in another form around strength, about resilience, about courage, about speaking out. That's what really, gets my goat is they could
Well,
have
what
turned it around and used it as a positive, and they haven't.
what
They're very, really disappointing.
what's frustrating is, so say two people, three people have complained, you might get 30, 50 people that has a powerful impact on, but they don't say anything. They've kept that to themselves.
Yeah.
So these three or four people, a handful of people, like why do they get to say for everyone
Shout the
else?
loud, yeah. They're shouting the
Um,
loudest, don't they? Yeah.
and what you're saying was a minute ago is exactly right. So most perpetrators of CSA, um, they have like, well, they're not right in the head, obviously. So they have a mechanism where all the shame, all the guilt, all the disgust, all the negative feelings that they should carry, it just flows off them and it goes onto the perpetrator, on the victims. And a turning point for me, as I like recovered from my own trauma and got my sense of agency back and felt okay. So I started watching like documentaries, like the Jimmy Savile one on Netflix
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And this guy, just Jimmy Savile, he spent 50 years brazen, confident, you know, living his life like when he's doing all these horrific things and all his victims uh, destroyed basically. So in my mind, I was like, why should I not be like that? Why shouldn't I be confident and brazen and say it as it is?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right, because that's the problem is they're so brazen. And because, like you say, A, they're not right in the head. B, they don't think they've done anything wrong. You know, you very much find that with perpetrators again of domestic abuse and of post-separation abuses. If you sat them down and said, "Do you understand that this, and this is wrong?" They'd be like, "Don't." They just wouldn't see it. They don't think that what they're doing is wrong. So when you're trying to reason with somebody that clearly doesn't have any empathy, has no remorse for what they've done, has absolutely no remorse for what they've done. You know, what can you do other than, as you just said quite rightly, is stand up and shout louder? Because if, like you say, I mean, I've not seen that documentary, and I think having grown up in a time when I was, I was little in the 80s. I was born in 1978, but I grew up, watching Jim will fix it and or watching all those things. And that became normal. And then when you find out these absolutely horrific things that have gone on that have been normalized, that have been like, oh well, like you say. But the awful thing is, it's like do a documentary, but then that's that. It's done. We've boxed that off now. We can't do that. We have to keep going. We have to keep talking about it. We have to be in people's faces. That's the thing is, it's got to be in people's faces because I don't believe for 1 second that there isn't somebody that if people are watching or listening to this, there's somebody in your life that has experienced some form of trauma or abuse, whether it's somebody you work with, whether it's a family member, a friend, a neighbor. There is somebody that has experienced, whether they know it or not themselves, it's out there and it's out there and it is everywhere, unfortunately. It's not to scare people, it's just to be realistic and say, aren't we better learning to understand and be more knowledgeable about these things so that if it happens to you, then you can prepare yourself, say, okay, so now I need support. I didn't realize this was happening. Because, a lot of the time I would imagine with child sexual abuse, very similar to domestic abuses, it's that manipulation, it's that coercive control. So you don't even know it's happening. So when you're trying to explain it to people and they're sort of looking at you going, well, I would have said, you can tell by the faces they're going, you didn't realize it was that, really? You didn't? Well, no, why would you? When you're being manipulated and you're being coerced so severely, then what you believe as reality, unfortunately, isn't reality, but they've convinced you. And unfortunately, the psyche is very, very strong.
It's hard, particularly for CSA. So if a good analogy is like a fish in water. So if the water you've only ever known is abusive, how do you know that that's wrong?
Yeah.
It's only as you get older and you can analyze and your self-awareness grows. You're like, oh, actually, this is what that was,
Yeah.
and it was wrong.
Yeah. And I can't, and the thing is, what you're doing is a lot of people would sadly shy away or maybe think, you know what, that part of my life, I need to now try and move forward, or I need to think to myself, this is it. Whereas actually you're immersing yourself in it to help other people. So you're making sure that you're not stepping away and saying, I can't talk about that, I can't deal with it. You are doing everything you possibly can. And you're helping so many people. That's the big thing I think that's so important that people understand is you're helping so many other people realize they're not alone. And that's so much of what this comes down to, isn't it? Is that shame and blame factor that, like you say, out of the 2 or 3 people at the university that complained, you've got 40 or 50 potentially that obviously it really had an impact, but they're not allowed to, or maybe don't want to say anything, like you say. But that's what we need to be doing is getting that impact out there. And I think that's what you're doing. And people knowing that there is that support, realizing you are not alone, um, that can make all the difference. Because mental health, I had somebody say to me a while ago, well, I never kind of put the whole kind of post-separation abuse, domestic abuse in with mental health. I was like, how could it not? And I would imagine it's the same with CSAs. How could it not affect your mental health when you've experienced something so traumatic? Of course it's going to, but you're doing what you're doing to help others and to keep going. And I think what you're doing is incredible. I really do.
Oh, thank you. And
No.
it does impact people because what you said before about people that you don't know you're reaching, who it affects. I know that to be true because I've had people now tell me that they're CSA survivors, but they've only told the therapist.
Yeah.
Joe, and this has come up in conversations not related to any of this work, just general.
Yeah.
And it's come around because they've said I might want to take part in your projects down the line. I was like, oh, are you a survivor? And then that's when they disclose. Um, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of CSA survivors that probably not even told anyone, you
Yeah.
know, and for people that find it uncomfortable because they've never experienced this, you know, this isn't for you. We're not trying to reach you. We're
Yeah.
reaching people that it does affect, it does impact, and they've not told anyone because the stigma around CSA causes people to keep it to themselves,
Yeah.
and this is not something you can keep to yourself. You'll never heal from this on your own. That's a fact. You can try, but you won't.
No, you need
Um,
support, you need help, you need people who understand, who've been in that position to, and do you know what's interesting? I was talking about something recently again around obviously about abuse, and I was saying every situation, I would never ever presume to know about somebody's situation around post-separation abuse because every situation is unique and how everybody reacts to what's happening to them is unique as well. But there is common threads. There's bound to be common threads. There's going to be, very much the blueprint of perpetrators, the way they behave. And unfortunately, when you identify it and you see it for what it is, you can almost tell what they're going to do next. You can predict. It's like you become some kind of bloody magician. You can predict their next step. You know what they're going to do. And that gives you power. That gives you empowerment and control, is because you know you've seen it for what it is. Now you go, I know exactly what they're going to do. They're not going to turn up at court, or they're going to deny it all, or they're going to do that. You can see it all. And as frustrating as and unfair as that is, that in some ways does give you that element of power because you know that you know exactly what they're up to and you can see it. And that's what you want other people to see, isn't it? You want other people to know you're not on your own and actually you can see exactly what their next move's going to be because you've already predicted it. Now you know exactly what they are. Not who they are, what I call it what they are. They're not a person, they're an it.
yeah, it, it's difficult. So I can't speak too much about my case because it's still ongoing, but I reported my perpetrator to the police in September 21, and they only got arrested in March this year. And it was just a catalogue of errors up until that point. Um, they went on the run for 2 years. I told GMP where they was hiding. They never checked it out, or they did very basic inquiries um, that they said was a negative lead. And then 6 months down the line, they capture my perpetrator where I told them they was hiding. Um, that was after they'd sent like death threats to me and my family, and you know it was just very, very hard. So
Wow.
you're ignored basically, and these perpetrators are protected. Again, it comes down to protection.
Yeah.
It's all geared to protect abusers, which has to change. Um, I was in court over the summer, and again, like you said, not turning up to court and just playing the system. Uh, there was 5 plea hearings because I was allowed to. Um,
Postponing and doing,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and that was fine. You know, there's no consideration for the impact this has on
No.
on me or other survivors. And then the trial is not till March 26th. You know, so then you've got to wait till that. The whole
That's
thing's a
huge.
joke.
It is a joke, and it's years and years and years of your life while you're trying to move forward that all this is going on. And thank God you're in the position you are where you are clearly very courageous, very strong, and you know your own mind and you know exactly what you're doing. And but there's a lot of people that don't. And what gets me about this is where is the support in the court system that when that happens and they don't turn up or it's postponed, 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 and you what people don't realise is, and what the court system does not realise, and the justice system doesn't, well, I call it justice system, and so-called justice system realise is you've built yourself up for that. You've geared yourself up mentally, emotionally, physically, because going to court is physically exhausting as well as mentally and emotionally. And you've geared yourself up for all that for them not to turn up. So that's like a slap in the face from the perpetrator. It's a slap in the face from the court, and it's just so unfair. So where's the support for the victims and the survivors then? They've just got to walk away and go, all right, so now I've just got to wait for the next time. The
Yeah.
impact that that has is so dangerous.
Well, here's an example from my case. So at the last plea hearing, it was supposed to be on July 16th. So I rang uh, Minshall Street Court on the day before for the listings.
Yeah.
She put me on hold. She said, "Oh, I can't find it." I gave her the full details. She said, "Bear with me a second." Put me on hold, and then she come back about 5 minutes later, and she said, "Oh, this has been postponed until the 9th of September 2025." So a full over a year away. I was
Oh,
like,
the
"Well,
phone.
yeah." And I said, "Well, why is that?" She said, "Oh, I'm not too sure." She said, "You might." She said, "You'll have to try the CPS." So I rang the CPS, asked them why it had been changed. They said they don't know. I rang GMP Witness Care. They said they still had it down on their system as going ahead tomorrow. So I was like, well,
Oh,
who the fuck? What is
yeah,
going on here? Like, who's
absolutely.
making these decisions? Someone must know why it's changed. It's not changed itself.
No. And
And
somebody somewhere down the line, yeah.
this is supposed to be like prestigious cornerstone of society, the law, Joe, and it's pardon my French, but it's fucking shambles. It's a joke.
Well, and that we're all supposed to, as civilians, we're all supposed to adhere to the law. We're all supposed to do as we're told. But like you say, perpetrators are being protected left, right, and centre. And if you hadn't have phoned up, whatever it was, whatever the reason was, whether you knew in your gut, whether you're unconscious, whatever it was that made you ring up and double check and find out what was going on, you'd have turned up and built yourself up for that, for nothing to happen. And it's so, this is another thing that really annoys me as well is nobody in terms of all these different agencies and systems are singing from the same hymn sheet. No, Mr. Blogs over here doesn't know what's going on over here. They haven't got a clue. So when it comes to victims and survivors and they're going through this, they're having to ring up not just one system or one agency, two, three, four, five. And by the time you've repeated yourself 20 times, and then they wonder why you start getting cross. They wonder
Yeah.
why you start having a bit of an attitude. And it's like, well, because I've spent my entire day dealing with you. I won't say the word. Yeah, beep, bleep, 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 bleep. But that's the problem is, everything about it just all needs tearing down and starting again. That's the problem.
It does, and it's frustrating, like because you're basically invalidated at every turn of the road.
Yeah,
Your experiences themselves are horrific, and then you've got to just put all these battles in just to be heard. It's tiring, but
yeah,
it has to change. Like
yeah.
you can't continue that way.
You have to be as relentless as they are. You have to not stop. And that's I love the fact it's called Victorious Voices, the project. I think that's brilliant because it is, and this is exactly what society, what the systems, what the perpetrators trying to do is silence your voice. And I know it sounds really cheesy, but sometimes that's all we've got is our voice. However we
Yes.
use it, in whatever way we can, nobody should be able to silence another human being in their experience of what they've experienced. And something that gets me as well is, and I said something a while ago, and I don't think it was very popular, but for me, having children and looking at talking about domestic abuse, talking about child sexual abuses, why are we educating children when they're about to go into secondary school? So, say year 6, where they know a lot anyway. Let's be honest, in this day and age, my kids knew damn sight more than I did when I was 11, a lot more. I was very naive, and they do know a lot more now through social media, through everything else. They could probably tell us a thing or two. But why are we not having these conversations around boundaries around as they're leaving primary and going into secondary? They have sex education in year 6. Why are we not having these conversations with children in an age appropriate way? I get it. It can't all be like, by the way, domestic abuse is this, by the way, child sexual abuse is this. It needs to be done in a way that's thought about and considered and supportive. But there are so many children that will be experiencing all these things and don't have that support in place. And like you say, if adults are scared to speak out, why would a child, especially if a child thinks it's normal, like you say, until you become that almost like age of reasoning and questioning and wondering and that self-awareness, why are we not talking about this at an earlier age and doing it in a way where kids can understand and speak out? Because we could be helping so many more people. And I really believe that because when children start secondary school, they're going into a very scary environment. It's the big leagues, isn't it? When you've gone from primary, lovely little primary school, and then all of a sudden you're there and you're with kids who are, you're in the same playground as people who are 18 almost. It's scary. It's a lot to take in. And if you're also dealing with things behind the scenes that nobody else knows about, I just can't even. I just think we need to be talking about it and normalizing talking about it.
Yeah, that's what we're big on, just normalizing the conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and it works, I know it works because I know people that would never have spoke about this, or had any understanding of it, tell me through my work that yeah, it's not as weird for them now. They have an understanding of it.
Yeah.
Because that's all stigma is, it's fear in the unknown. People
Of course
fear
it is.
CSA because we don't know much about it. We don't know why people do it. It's evil, it's pretty horrid.
Yeah.
But them facts can't prevent you from, acknowledging it and um the people that it happens to. We can't be ignored. We can't be shunned because of horrific stuff that we didn't do.
Exactly. And that's for me now, it's got to come to a point. If we're being, as we, we're hearing the news all the time, how society, we're there for everybody and everybody has their own place and all the rest. And it's all just lip service because at the end of the day, these are the conversations that are still in the shadows. These are the conversations that you don't see on mainstream daytime TV or even in the evening. And it's exactly as it should, what we should be doing is exactly that, talking about it. Talking about it isn't going to make it happen more. It's going to make it happen less because people will be aware. People will realize what's going on. The more we hide it, that's the damage. That's where the damage is being done. And like you say, it's like making child sexual abuse, domestic abuse, it's like a dirty secret. I've worked with people around post-separation abuse and for them, they don't want to tell anybody because, like, well, I've got to show that I'm the perfect mum or dad, and I can hold down my job and I can deal with going to court 50,000 times and dealing with children's services, dealing with my children's impact of the abuse that they've already experienced whilst living with the perpetrator. And we need to stop putting that pressure on victims and survivors to feel like they have to show this face to the world where they're, the perfect human being. None of us are perfect. None of us have got it 100% right. If we did, well, then there won't be all the problems that there are in the world. So clearly, we're not getting it right. But we have to stop this idyllic idea of, well, I'm perfect and I'm Superwoman or I'm Superman, I can do it all. We're not. We need help.
Yeah,
And, I talk a lot about well-being when I talk to organizations because I think that's one of the aspects for me anyway, when I talk about abuse is, when you're dealing with all these things, and like you're saying, this is dragging on now for years and years and years for you. And your well-being, your self-care, you hit burnout, don't you? You hit burnout and go, I'm trying to balance so many things. And you have to take care. And if anybody is listening or watching that thinks that maybe this is something that has happened to them during their childhood, it's so important to take care of your well-being. It sounds so cheesy these days because we use the word well-being here, there, and everywhere, but it's true. You have to. And if you have a day where you feel like saying, actually, don't feel like getting up today, feel like just chilling out, feel like do it
yeah,
100%. Because if you need that, that's what your body and your mind is telling you need, then do it. Don't stay there, obviously, because you want to live, but you're allowed. I think a lot of people who've experienced abuse are scared of allowing themselves time because then you're being left with your own thoughts. So it's like we were talking about before we recorded, about being busy. Like a lot of people who've been victims and survivors of abuse like to stay busy, like to keep their mind going all the time, like to be active. And I think we have to allow ourselves sometimes to just say, okay, I'm all right to actually have a break. I am allowed a break. Yeah,
yeah. It's difficult.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, you do so much anyway. You never stop, clearly. We're connected through LinkedIn as well, and I see what you're doing, and you never stop, which is amazing because but everybody needs that time for them as well, and I think that's important, isn't it, to highlight that aspect of life is if you are experiencing any form of abuse, and especially if you're experiencing if you have experienced child sexual abuses, you need to take care of you, and however you do that, whatever support you look for, it's so important.
It is, and all this stuff with the legal system, and it's not just bad on performance level, poor performance. It's there is zero consideration for trauma. There's no aspect of trauma care in there. Um, and it's kind of like a willful ignorance on that front. There seems to be, because it's the law, because it's the police, we can't implement any form of trauma awareness, you know,
Mm.
particularly with C.I.C.
Yeah.
And again, that's got to change because, I've been forced to live in conditions where at its worst, I want to kill myself. I'll get suicide ideation where you're triggered to the point you're reliving everything constantly. And it takes a lot to get past that. But there's no consideration for that. It's just like, well, we're doing our best. That's what I kept getting told. We're doing our best. We have a plan in place. If
But
I had
this,
a plan for 2 years that wasn't working, then that's
yeah,
a crap plan.
yeah, I'd go back to the drawing board. Clearly, your plan's not working. Yeah, that is so true. And and I think it's really amazing that you do highlight that because, again, in terms of those suicidal thoughts that people do have when they think they've got nowhere else to turn, when they've experienced trauma and they're trying to process it all, um, I think so many systems and a lot of systems I've come into contact with do not have a trauma-informed approach. They don't understand trauma. They don't, and especially the legal system, I don't think has any idea about trauma
No,
and what that does to a human being. And then why are we not, we have all this money that's being spent on this, that, and the other. Why are we not making sure that all these systems that are working with victims and survivors are trauma informed? And also, I think a lot of the time, victims and survivors are the best placed people to work in these areas because when you have people who are victims and survivors, and if they feel that they're in that position where they can deal with it all, then you do find a lot of people who work around domestic abuse and post-separation abuse, they've experienced it themselves, so they want to be able to help other people, and they feel that they're at a point in their life now where they can be that rational thinking, put things into perspective. But we need more people in these areas who've had the experience. Unfortunately, there's nothing like experience for people to understand what something is like. And when you've got people in all these positions of power and all these systems that have no clue, then why are we not making sure everyone's trauma informed when they're dealing with people?
it's really difficult because I've in the past I've applied for roles in like charities and other organizations in this field,
Yeah.
and they say, "Oh, you don't have the experience."
I
I was like, I am the experience.
am,
Like,
yeah.
what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But because you don't fit the mold, like the conventional mold,
Wow.
you're invalidated, kind of. Um, Again, it's just short-sightedness, really.
It is short-sightedness, and we have to change that. You're right. And I'm with you on doing anything and everything that is possible to make sure that nobody is ever sitting there thinking, I've got nowhere to turn. That to me is why I do what I do, and that's why I love talking to people like you, is because it just proves the point that people don't have to be on their own. People can come together and have a conversation, which hopefully will help and take away that blame and shame. And that's the thing now. We saw it with the case in France not that long ago, and where she talks about shame needs to switch sides. It's
Yeah,
got to. It's got to. It can't stay the way it is. It can't stay this horrible feeling for those who've experienced abuse, saying, actually, it's down to you. No, it's not. The
yeah.
perpetrator is the only place shame and blame should be left is with a perpetrator and nowhere else. But just out of interest, before we wrap up, if you and I don't normally do this in terms of one piece of advice, but you're so knowledgeable on so much, and you're such a lovely human being.
No,
Um,
thank you.
if you were going to give somebody advice, if somebody was listening or somebody was watching, thinking, actually, I've got a feeling that maybe this is something either I've experienced or my siblings experienced, what would be your sort of one takeaway? It doesn't have to be anything huge, but what would be your one takeaway to give somebody to say?
In a basic form, don't be fearful. You know, the road to recovery is challenging. It takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of strength, and you have to make decisions which induce fear. You have to get over that. Um, and what I was saying before about you can't heal on your own, like you might think you are, but what survivors of C.I.C do is they reduce their world into a really small manageable zone. So what that encompasses is cutting off relationships, cutting off experiencing things, just living in a really small bubble. So you might be thinking, "Oh, I'm handling this pretty well," but the reality is you've cut yourself off from life to manage it. You build up these great big walls that protect you, but they block out everything, not just the bad, the good as well. Um, and I know that from experience. I used to think I'm doing all right, but I'm not. I'm living in a really small bubble. For an example, I used to work nights. I didn't like working nights. What I liked was not being around people and feeling safe. When you can get that feeling in life, everyday life around people during the day when everyone else is awake. Some people might like working nights, but you're on your own basically.
Yeah.
So just little things like that. Um, and the other advice is just tell someone. If you've never told someone, tell someone. Um, and research as well. It's a difficult thing to disclose. I always likened it to like a nuclear bomb. So like no one wants to detonate a nuclear bomb because they know it's going to destroy everything. And
Yeah.
that's what happens to your world. Your perpetrator is often close. So it's not just your life that's going to impact, it's their life, it's the other people that know the perpetrator. It's like widespread. Um, and you bury that bomb to protect, but you can't, you're going to destroy yourself. And destroying yourself is not worth protecting someone that has done this to you. So take the leap. And you don't have to tell the world, just tell someone, even if it's a therapist, so you can recover and you can to begin to take what's been taken from you, which is your sense of safety, your sense of who you are, and your peace of mind. That's once you get that back, then everything else is fine, really.
That's I don't think there's any better advice you could give, and I think you are, as I say, one of the loveliest people I've ever met anyway, obviously. And I knew we hit it off straight away when we started chatting. And I think you are making a huge difference, a massive difference in people's lives. And you're living proof that you can move forward and you can take it one step at a time. And yeah, you're just amazing.
Oh,
You
thank
are.
you. But
Oh,
it's a slow road, it's baby steps, it's hard. You have to sit in a lot of pain to recover. That's the difficult part. There's no other way around it. And that's why groups like Victorious Voices is powerful because peer-to-peer support is probably the biggest thing that you can get you through this because you can have therapy which helps you and you can see like clinical people, but I've always felt with that there's a us versus them kind of feel like you're the patient, you're the broken person. When peer-to-peer support is not like that, you're just a person this has happened to, and we're trying to get to here with this.
yeah,
Um, and people can help you. It's
yeah,
what you
yeah,
said before about feeling alone. You don't have to feel alone. And once you don't feel alone, that's when things change.
yeah, definitely. I could not agree with you more. And so if anybody wants to check out Victoria's Voices, where can they find the details?
It's Victorious Voices on Instagram, _24. And then we're on LinkedIn. My website, placesnowhere.com, has all the portraits on there. We're going to get our own website in the new year, but again, it's baby steps. Um,
Listen, one step at a time. You're doing a lot.
and then there's an exhibition at 92 Degrees at the moment, which is a coffee shop on John Dalton Street in Manchester. It's going to be exhibited in the Great Northern Warehouse from the new year. Not sure the date yet. And then there's a couple of other events, one in Leeds, one in Bristol. Uh, but again, I've not got the dates to hand.
Wow.
But it's
Well,
getting
I'm gonna
about.
have to nip into Manchester myself and go and have a nosy in the new year. I
Yeah,
will. And
yeah.
have a look.
Well, let me know and I'll come with you.
Oh, that'd be lovely. We'll get some pictures for your Instagram. Not with me on, obviously. I'll just be there in the background. Oh, thank you, Lee. Thank you so, so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Very, 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 very privileged to know you. So thank you.
Thank you.
away.